Hello, everybody. So Michael Saylor, the founder and chairman of MicroStrategy, has been making a lot of interviews lately in long-form podcast, multiple hours. And I've listened to a few hours of his latest podcast and the latest views of Michael Saylor on MicroStrategy and how he sees the stock. And of course, today, we celebrate today. I mean, this stock, the performance has been absolutely nuts. When I made this video, for example, so that was $100 pre-split, and 5 months ago, I was still buying at this level at 100. Now it's 215, right? So it's a double in 5 months. But even then, like when I was covering it in February 2023, it's crazy to think that ever since that one day that I posted a video I was buying before, my channel barely existed back then. It's up like a 7.5x from this, and the numbers, they don't make sense. It's ridiculous. It's bigger than most think. It's bigger than I thought initially, and it's a stock that I don't plan on selling anytime soon. I'm not buying it either because I have a psychological bias of not buying it after a 700 more for some of my lots run after that run. I obviously don't want to add to it. I want to point out that when I made that video, actually, that was not the best time to buy MicroStrategy. The best time to buy MicroStrategy was a few months before, and you see the stock at around 80% in 2 months. And so what does that tell you is it's like we have this bias when we look at stocks and we see a stock that has run up by 80 or 100% in the past 3 months, in the past 6 months. We have this bias to think that it's not going to keep running. That's why I think it's much more important to pick the right asset and commit to this asset for a very, very long run. I mean, look at the people who committed to Netflix, right? Look at Netflix today. The performance of the stock today, absolutely outstanding, right? So people who have committed to stocks like Apple, stocks like Tesla, and assets like Bitcoin, if you committed to an asset like Bitcoin over the past 10 years, you've been handsomely rewarded. These 80% moves from year to year, they are actually not that high if you think about the very long-term upward volatility of this stock. My plan for my MicroStrategy position is to obviously borrow against it someday, unless we ever get rid of fiat currency, which I don't think is going to happen, at least in my lifetime. And so borrowing against it is my plan, and it's the plan I think of a lot of investors in Bitcoin and our understanding of how devaluation works and how hard assets work. This is not the topic of this video. This video is not about a celebration of the stock price. It's about looking at the Bitcoin 24 model. Michael Saylor has highlighted 2 new things in his interviews. How he thinks the company should be valued, A, and then his price targets, which he highlighted at a Bitcoin conference a few months back. And so if you go on GitHub, you can download the models, and I did just that. And so let me show you the model of Michael Saylor for the price of Bitcoin, not for the price of MicroStrategy. This is his model for the price of Bitcoin, and that's his base case, his base prediction. And I'm going to use it 3 years, right? 2030, 2035, 2045. So in 2030, Michael Saylor views Bitcoin as still being smaller than gold. He views its gold as being a 20 trillion asset. He views Bitcoin as being a smaller asset, a 10 trillion-ish asset, and his price target for Bitcoin in 2030 is $572,000. You can see, we fast forward 5 years, right? 2030, this is Michael Saylor's base vision of assets. I mean, you can see Bitcoin, it just landed on the map. It doesn't beat currency, it doesn't beat equity, it definitely doesn't beat bonds, which are bigger than equity. And then the real estate market, I mean, this I should make a video about, because I actually think the real estate market is going to decrease in value tremendously, because of much of that value of real estate is tied to the fact that we have so much debt in the system. I happen to believe that if the debt deflates, the real estate will deflate. Anyways, that's for a different topic. His model, Bitcoin 24, he's predicting, these are not my numbers, he's predicting 2030, he's predicting a price of $572,000 a Bitcoin, which would be outstanding. It'd be nearly a 10x from today. It'd be outstanding. Now, what about his 2035 prediction? Now, this is 10 years out, right? This is much tougher to predict 10 years out. So 10 years out, he predicts that Bitcoin will be $45 trillion asset class as an asset class. And he predicts that the price of Bitcoin will be $2.1 million. You can see it right here, 2.1. And then 2045, I'm going to go all the way out to 2045, which is the number that he keeps highlighting on all of his podcasts, is 13.4 million in 2045, and that's how far his model goes. His model doesn't go as far, and he's predicting that by 2045, Bitcoin will actually be above the art market and obviously above the gold market, but still below the currency market. So he's still predicting that fiat will keep on printing and keep on doing all of that. And you can see it's 280 trillion market cap for Bitcoin. And of course, the size of the pie itself will have also tremendously grown. And so 13.4 trillion, now whenever Saylor goes on a podcast and he's asked about his price target, that's the one he gives. He says, I think Bitcoin will achieve 29% CAGR over the next 20 years to reach finally 13.4 million by 2035. Again, these are not my numbers. I am merely just using the model posted on GitHub. So, to sum up, the price targets are 2030, 572,000, 2035, 2.1 million, 2045, 13.4 million. And that is the Saylor base target. And of course, to be honest right now, as I look at these numbers, they feel unrealistic, right? It totally does. 572,000 for one Bitcoin in 2030, that feels unrealistic. And let me tell you a story that I've repeated many times on the channel. I will never ever be as wealthy as I was when I made this mistake. This mistake was to convert my Bitcoin for 250. Convert my Bitcoin for 250 because it had run, and I could not possibly believe that Bitcoin could be at 68,000 now. I was like, there's no way, right? And of course, 2015, I mean, you were at the edge of the edge. People thought you were dumb of the dumb of the dumb, the dumbest of the dumbest of the dumbest, which, today we have some Bitcoiners that are warming up to multi-$100,000 predictions, but I would argue still most people think that this type of prediction is, kind of ridiculous, and we can't really even wrap our heads around that. Bitcoin messes up with people's minds big time, and I will tell you, it's not only Bitcoin. Technology messes up with people's mind. Big tech messes up with people's mind. I remember clear as day when Apple hit $1 trillion valuation 5 years back. The CNBC set could not believe it. They thought it was crazy. Now Apple is a $3 trillion market cap, and we go about our day and we don't care. And so are we going to have big tech companies in say the 10 trillion, right? The decatrillion. Are we going to get to a decatrillion tech company in the 2035, 2045? The answer to that is yes, even though it's very hard to wrap our heads around that and our heads onto how much money can be created, how much of a denominator can be devalued. And I'm only pointing that out that yes, we will have $1 trillion companies because I'm going to do the calculation that Saylor talks about on his own stock with his own predictions. So let's go through that. Michael Saylor happens to believe that MicroStrategy as a Bitcoin bank, they are earning a Bitcoin yield. And of course, they're not a Bitcoin bank yet. That is the vision. They are earning a Bitcoin yield. Right now, over the past 9 months, the yield year to date has been 17%. It's been the yield, 17%. Now, he's achieved that yield by issuing shares and buying Bitcoin. So by issuing new shares, buying Bitcoin, diluting, you dilute the number of shares outstanding, and you dilute those not as fast as you grow the Bitcoin pie. Sorry about that, I was just interrupted. Let me get back to this. So, right now I believe the yield on Bitcoin is 20% per annum roughly, because they've earned about 70%, 17% year to date. Right now, the way MicroStrategy earns yield is by issuing convertible debt and buying the Bitcoin. So you have the dual effect of shorting the US dollar and buying the Bitcoin. That's how they earn that yield. If you've watched my prior videos on MicroStrategy, you know my belief as to how yield is going to be earned on Bitcoin in the future. They will be yields that are close to hard money loans. So hard money loans, hard money interest, hard money standards are actually pretty close to the 20% and even higher. We're going to go back to an era, I think, where the value of the money lent is going to be lent at interest rates that are not fractional reserve banking interest rates, but that are interest rates very similar to the rates that were practiced in the Middle Age before the invention of fractional reserve banking. Anyways, regardless of where we think the yield is headed, I'm going to keep that 20% per annum yield going forward. So Michael Saylor thinks that 20% yield on the Bitcoin, it's going to be reported, right, at the end of the year. They have to do it by early 2025. It's going to be reported as investment income, right? And if Bitcoin goes down, as investment loss. But it's going to be reported as Bitcoin income, and that Bitcoin income is what the company earnings should represent, at least economic earning. And then there should be a ratio, a multiple on top of that earning, kind of how financial companies are valued today, right? You earn fees, your income fees become your revenue, and then you're getting a multiple on top on that money that you're making in the form of income, investment income. Companies trade on basis of PE. He thinks MicroStrategy should trade on the basis of the income, i.e. the interest that they can earn on the Bitcoin bag. So let us do the math. MicroStrategy owns 252,000 Bitcoins, and so they are worth today 17.2 billion USD. That's what they're worth today at 68,000 a Bitcoin. 20% yield of 17 billion would be 3.4 billion. 3.4 billion. That's 20% of 17 billion. So that's the yield. And then he believes that there should be a multiple on top of that. The multiple I'm going to use is kind of a historic multiple of S&P 500. I'm going to use a multiple of 15x that for the value of the company. But you'll see that he's not too far off, because as of the close tonight, MicroStrategy's market cap right now is about 45 billion. And so I do 45 billion divided by 3.44 billion, which is the 20% yield earned on the $17 billion worth of Bitcoin. We are getting at a 13 times multiple. This is trading at a quote-unquote PE, a recalculated PE, my own economic version of a PE. This is trading at a 13 times investment income. And this is where this video gets interesting. This is where this video gets kind of crazy. So we're going to make two assumptions. We're going to assume that going forward, the yield is going to be 20% every year. And of course, because that yield is often taking the form of new Bitcoin acquired, I am going to assume that that yield is taking mostly the form of new Bitcoin, and thus I'm going to assume that no more new Bitcoin is acquired. Notice how both of these assumptions are nearly impossible to know, right? The yield is 20%. It could be higher than 20% if a stock trades at a higher premium, and it can dilute or issue shares at such a high premium that actually issuing shares is extremely accretive. You could go higher than that. In the case of a crisis, a hard money loan could be much higher than 20%. And have a conversation with an AI as to what the loans could look like under hard money standards. So that's point number one. The yield is 20%. That's what I'm assuming. That's what we're going to earn roughly this year. And I'm assuming that no more Bitcoin is acquired. I'm assuming that the Bitcoin stays mostly fat. Both of these assumptions are likely wrong. Let me put that out there. But let's go ahead with these assumptions and let's see what would be the value of a company based on these two assumptions that are likely wrong, and based on the price target of Michael Saylor himself that are also likely wrong. They may be higher, they may be lower, but it's very tough, especially 2045. How are you supposed to know? But now that we have these data, we can go on and do the calculation. So Again, 2030, 5 years from now, I'm assuming they have the same bag of Bitcoin, the same number of Bitcoin. So I'm assuming in 2030 they have 252,000 Bitcoin. Each Bitcoin is worth $500,000. So what do you get? You get $144 billion worth of Bitcoin. Then I'm applying a 20% yield. That was my assumption number one. That means that the income, quote unquote, the investment income is 28.8 billion. And then I multiply that by the multiple that I think is fair for I hope soon to be S&P 500 company, a 15 multiple. I'm applying that multiple, so I do 28 times 15. I get a market cap of $432 billion in 2030, or a 9.6x from today's market cap of 45 billion. And this is when the math gets kind of crazier. And that, by the way, that would be an outstanding investment return if they got there. But, and again, remember, the more we go in time, the blurrier the picture. So 2035, same bag, 252,000. Now the price of Bitcoin is $2 million. That means you have $534 billion worth of Bitcoin. You earn a 20% yield on that. That means your interest income, quote unquote, is 107 billion. You take that 107 billion of interest income on these hard money loans and all of this yield that they earn. You do a 15 on that, you get a $1.6 trillion market cap, and that would be a 36x from today in 10 years. Very much outstanding. And then 2045, let's do the math again. 252,000 Bitcoin, 13 million a coin. That's $3.3 trillion worth of Bitcoin, potentially in 2035 on the balance sheet of MicroStrategy. You assign a 20% yield. That's 676 billion of quote-unquote yield income. You take that yield income, you multiply it by 15, you get a $10.1 trillion market cap, and you get a potentially 224x over a 20-year period. These numbers are crazy. They are extremely high, but they are also not unfindable. These numbers you can find in the market. If you look at the total return of companies like Netflix, companies like Amazon, go pick Tesla, go pick into those ultra special companies that have outperformed for 10, 15, 20 years. The numbers are not entirely out of hand and out of whack with all of the data. It is possible, and there will be assets that will do a 200x in a 20-year period. That is within the realm of possibilities. You know, the main, you could say a big criticism is you don't think the yield is going to be 20% in 2045. And I tell you, that all depends if we go back to a fully hard money standard or if we don't, right? Because don't forget, the denominator, in my view, is already dropping at 15% a year in terms of value. The dollar is being diluted at 15% a year. And I would tell you that, well, maybe I'm optimistic on my assumption of them being able to keep that 20% yield. Maybe I'm very optimistic. Although if you look at the typical ROE, say, of companies, it's not that far off. Like the typical return on equity of a company is not that far off from that. But anyways, you could say it's a little too high. I would tell you that I think my assumption of no more Bitcoin is way too conservative. So again, this may warrant its own spreadsheet, and I may be compelled to do a full spreadsheet about this just because MicroStrategy is such a huge position for me. This is obviously a dream video. This is just dreaming. Feel free to look at the model, look at the assumptions, and remember, this is not me who's saying that. I'm simply turning Michael Saylor's words into back of a napkin math. That is all I'm doing. Michael Saylor's words and his model, turning it into a back of a napkin math, and I get this 2030, I get a 9.6x, 2035, I get a 36x, 2045, I get a 220x from today. So I'm not selling, and this was not financial advice, no investment advice whatsoever. This is just entertainment, and this one was particularly entertaining, wasn't it? Right? Please like, please subscribe, follow me on X, follow me on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.